Hello, and welcome to everyone joining us live today for Stream's Engage and Elevate webinar. And a big thank you to those tuning in to this recording later. I'm Kenzie Wilson, the Field and Event Marketing Manager at Stream. And for those who may be unfamiliar, Stream helps developers launch apps faster with our modern SDKs, providing all the essential building blocks needed to create reliable, performant, and feature-rich real-time communication experiences. We work with companies like Strava, Nextdoor, and SoundCloud to provide live communication solutions that are redefining the industry. Today, we're diving into a topic that lies at the heart of B2B product management, leveraging technology to drive innovation and efficiency in enterprise applications. This discussion is vital as we explore how strategic product decisions can solve complex business challenges and create value at scale. I'm thrilled to welcome our guest today, Bram, who serves as the VP of Product at Showpad. With experience building top-performing teams across engineering and product, Bram will provide insights on mastering B2B product management.
Awesome. Great to be here. Thank you.
So, for those who don't know about Showpad, it's essentially an all-in-one AI-powered solution where marketing and revenue teams can come together to empower sellers through content and training. But Bram, I would love if you could kick things off by telling us a little bit more about what Showpad does and your role in the company.
Sure. That's also a mouthful, I guess, in terms of what we do. So I'm going to try and simplify it a little bit for people watching. So imagine you're like a seller in a large enterprise and you sell medical devices. So you can't do that just on your own. You actually need things like spec sheets of those medical devices. You probably need case studies to back up how those medical devices actually worked. You need some pitch decks as well. You need compliance info, legal info, all of those things. So those are things that you typically do not have available. You might have those on my laptop. Do you maybe ask marketing, the marketing team like yourself? Do you start searching on SharePoint? Do you ask a colleague? So that's kind of like one core problem that Showpad solves, is like it's the single source of truth for all of the content that you need as a sales rep in your particular role, selling your particular devices in your particular territory. So it's like curating all of that content. Then there's a second big problem we try and solve. So as a seller, or those types of sellers, you actually sell pretty complex systems. So think of like selling a satellite. You're not selling door to door. You're selling something that is pretty complex. So you can't just show up with a simple brochure kind of explaining what that is. It's a complex sale that needs a lot of interaction, a larger team as well to be involved. So you typically will need like visual tools to actually help guide you through that conversation. That conversation ends up often being nonlinear because it really depends on the input of the entire team. So that's a big other set of like those visual tools, almost apps, that we provide on top of the platform that help you with these nonlinear conversation. And then third is like you're new to a company as a sales rep, right? So you need to get trained, you need to get certified, because you can't just sell medical devices just like that. So maybe a new product becomes available as well. So there's a whole onboarding certification problem for sales reps that we solve. And then finally, they typically also have deal cycles that take up to like 1 to 2 years. So where do you store all of that info that's exchanged between? That's also a real problem that we solve with our deal rooms or our shared spaces, for example, where you can kind of like collaborate and put all of that content. So we have about 1,300 customers, or 1,400 actually. 70% of those are like enterprise organizations, so larger than 4,000 employees. And I lead our product management team within Showpad. So we're about 12 people in product management. That doesn't count product design and self-service and so on. So that group would be around 30 maybe. And we work with roughly 14 engineering teams on that product.
Wow.
Yeah.
Big teams. But
Yeah.
that's awesome. Yeah. I know, like, especially when people are, heads down in a deal, it can be really hard to compile all that information. And it's like one person knows about one aspect of the deal, somebody else knows about something else. And it's so hard to get all that information together. So that seems like a really
Exactly.
cool to have.
Exactly, exactly.
So I know that you mentioned that you serve enterprise customers and you specifically talked about healthcare, but I know you also
Mm,
tech and manufacturing. So
correct.
when you're building new features, how are you prioritizing them with such a diverse user base who have different needs? And what kind of frameworks do you use to ensure that all industries are being supported?
Mm, okay. Um, so I think early on, to be honest, like as in at the surface, the needs are largely the same across all of the industries. It's still sales and what you sell, as long as it's complex B2B sales, whether that complexity is like stream and it's SDKs and so on, or it's a satellite, like the example, it's still a complex sales process, and a lot of those needs are the same. So early on, in our history, so as in we're nearly 14 years old. I've been at the company for 8 of those. We didn't really focus much on industries. We focused more on like the breadth of the problem in a way of doing as much enablement use cases as possible. And I think that was, to be honest, like looking back, that was really important to grow, because that's how we established that space by defining like what are all those enablement use cases. Are those like 4 big ones that I named? They have a bit of sub use cases in there. So it was super important to grow that we actually took a general approach and looked at enablement as a whole and tried to become a full solution. um why was it so important? Because a lot of vendors already at that, or a lot of enterprises at that time were already starting to move away from point solutions. So they often would have either in-house tools, or they would have they would have like really small vendors, for example.
Mhm.
And in the end, that becomes unmanageable, or it isn't managed over time. So there was already a move there. So like covering as much as we can was really important early on. And then I would say it's been more like the last 3 years that we started to go more in depth and looking at it by industry, those industries, for example, that you mentioned. Um, I think the biggest challenge there has been sort of retraining our own biases, if that makes sense. Like, as in, you work at a tech company, I work at a tech company. We have sellers, you have sellers as well. So like immediately your the image that you get, and that happens to every single product manager, every single sales rep even that joins, you start to interpret things through your own experience and how like tech sales work, and it's often not how those businesses work. They focus much less on the deal. I'm sure like at Stream as well, you're happy about every deal that is signed, whereas they're a lot more focused on like account management and like how do you account manage a hospital or something like that. So it really took effort to retrain ourselves, and we did quite a lot of investment in that. I would say in terms of like framework, what was impactful there is like we established our ideal customer profile, and I'll probably might still cover a little bit more about that if we can get back to it. UX research in last few years was really impactful to that. Analytics, sort of established a separate function for that, was really impactful. And then we also have something, well, most companies have that, like your key accounts, your top accounts, the biggest accounts. We established product sponsorship, so like product leadership, myself, some of the directors, we all have a set of accounts, and that gives you a really good view, at least as a product leader, of like, okay, how does a Johnson and Johnson differ from a General Electric, and those types of customers, for example, or Coca-Cola, which is again a completely different use case. So it's not like one framework, but those were like the elements that helped us go from breadth to really now more in depth and deciding like, hey, do we solve for very specific industry needs or not?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And so, as you decided to kind of become a little bit more industry specific, how did you, refine your pricing or your packaging strategy? And like, what data did you use to make those informed decisions from industry to industry?
Yeah. Um, so I think that one's like pretty easy in terms of like pricing and packaging. We make very little distinction, and we're actually going through sort of like pricing and packaging distinction, or revamp a little bit. Um, so on that side, we don't make massive difference. What we're now trying to do in terms of which we hadn't done before, is like in our pricing strategy, we're now starting to bundle it as like specific add-ons on top of the product, where we go a bit more industry specific. Like it wouldn't necessarily be branded that way, but we do look at it that way of like, hey, this is a use case that is more specific, and then that helps, of course, because you can start tailoring your marketing and your messaging a little bit more around that. So that's something that we're working on. I think the other big part there of how we use data really to inform some of those decisions is like ideal customer profile. So that's something where, so in terms of data that we looked at is like you look at the lifetime value of customers across your like across all industries. So how much basically that means is like how much do they spend with your with you at your company um, while they're a customer, and then you look at the customer acquisition cost, and if you divide those two, you have lifetime value divided by customer acquisition cost. It's almost like your profit margin, as in you obviously need to make that customer acquisition cost back throughout your lifetime value. So if you divide those two and you map that out across all industries, you start seeing real patterns. So we have some industries that are a lot more profitable for us than other industries, because either they have a shorter lifetime value or the customer acquisition cost is significantly lower or something like that. So that's something that we really use to define clear ideal customer profiles. And then we have like two axes, but that's very specific then to Showpad, is like how mature are they in enablement? So it's like a journey from going to marketing and then having a specialized function that really sits within the sales organization, typically comes from marketing but evolves into a sales. And depending, like the industry is a pretty good proxy for that. And then you have GTM complexity. What we mean by that is typically like how difficult is it to sell your product, and that typically scales with the size of the org, or is like a pretty good proxy for it. So that's how we define ideal customer profiles, which are tied to industries.
Yeah, wow, that sounds amazing.
Yeah,
So
that
I'm
was,
sure.
as in, sounded easy. It sounded more complex when I explained it. I'm like, this is easy. No.
Yeah, but I'm sure it's nice to have all of that. Like, it's always nice when you can just look at the data rather than like brainstorming or trying to think like your customer or something like that. When you can just look and say, like, no, this is how they act, this is how they sell, this is, it's a lot easier when
Yeah,
you just the
absolutely. Absolutely.
straight facts.
Yeah,
So I'm
true.
sure analyst relationships are really important. I mean, you've talked about analytics quite a few times. And so how does feedback that you get from your analysts who are, diving into this data shape your roadmap? And how do you
Mm.
balance, their input, your internal stakeholders with customer feedback as well?
Yeah. Uh, Well, I'm actually not sure how like familiar people are with analysts. It bends a bit if you're really in sort of yeah, enterprise B2B. It's super important. I'm actually not sure with like Stream, for example, whether there is already like an analyst report or something like that on it. I'm not sure. I haven't seen it myself.
Yeah, so
Um,
we have like we're actually right now hiring for a data engineer to kind of help
okay,
with our analytics and stuff. So if anyone's looking.
right. Awesome. Um, no, so these analysts, so they're basically external companies that start to look at vendors in a space. So it's like Gartner is a big one, Forrester is a really big one. So they're really I mean, they are independent organizations, and they will really look at all of the vendors within a space, and they even define what is the space. So
Okay.
they'll like start a whole research track and so on. How does this space bring value, and who are all those vendors in there? Um, why it's so important is like in enterprise, when the way that deals work is that you often get a request for proposal from a company. It's not like as in you do as in there is inbound marketing as well. But often these larger companies, they will actually write out a sort of tender, almost a request for proposal. And what they'll do is like they'll shortlist vendors, and what they use as a reference to shortlist vendors is those analyst reports, so those independent reports, because they pay for those and they look at that. There's a second big reason, which is like sales morale, like internal sales morale. Like sales, I mean, it's highly competitive. They're highly competitive people. They like winning. Um, so often they're up against our competition. So they like having an external source that says like you are leading against that. It makes their life, their confidence a lot easier, and that makes a huge difference in how many deals. It's hard to measure, but it really does make a massive difference in how they feel, how confident they feel to go up against competition. And so those analyst reports, they actually really make a big difference in that. I think so. Yeah, I think the rest of your question was like, how do you balance that with input, with customer feedback, internal, like, or
Mhm.
like the vision or something like that?
Yeah. How do you
Yeah,
balance that with the feedback you get from your customers and internally, what's the vision of the company and all those things?
yeah. Um, so it is a pretty insane process, to be honest. So it's really like you're back at university. That's what it feels like, because they really it's like a final exam that you take. You do a written exam, you do an oral exam with the analysts. You get a scorecard. You get to bitch about your scorecard and say like I don't agree with that. So it's a whole process. It takes a lot of time. You have to take it extremely seriously. um so it's not easy to keep, like, as in to keep balancing that at the same time, because to a large extent they control what you, as in what they list in terms of capabilities. If I like for stream, for example, they would really define, you need to have commenting, you need to have an activity stream, you need to like emojis or stuff like that. So it's super detailed on what feature functionality you're supposed to have, and if you can't say yes to those, you just get a lower score. It is That's really how it works. So what goes on outside of that is that you have to have analyst relations. It's typically a product marketing function, actually. And what you try and do is, over the years, you try and feed them your vision. So like how they look at the space is actually your vision, essentially. You feed them your capabilities, so that like what they ask for is where you can differentiate versus what some of your competitors have. So that's kind of like some of the ways that you try and balance that and make sure that, like, you actually get scored on the things that are super relevant to but it's a whole game. It's really like it's not an easy game, and it's super important in enterprise sort of B2B product management.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I thought of it more as like an internal analyst, but it's someone who's external and it's these huge companies that everybody knows about. And I'm sure it helps, when you're selling to like a Coca-Cola, to be able to point to Gartner or whoever it may be and say, well, this is what they have to say about us.
Yeah. No. So exactly. It's like an external analyst. They typically are, as in, they're like, they have a research profile, but typically they've been like, in our space, they would have been like a VP of sales or something in their career. So they usually have, as in, they really are industry experts, no doubt about that. But it is one or two individuals essentially that you're trying to talk to essentially, uh, and it's kind of their opinion for sure. So it's like a professor almost.
Oh,
To
wow.
yeah. And you do need an analyst team internally, so you need like product marketing internally that really focuses on that. We have like one person that's fully dedicated
Mhm.
on that. Then your product marketing function needs to do competitive research continuously, so you get a good idea of like where can you realistically claim that you are differentiated. You need to get the right case studies because it's like the proof points are really important. So they don't, as in, you can claim whatever you want, right? As in, they look at your product. They're not users of your product, so you need to come with proof points of like, we have this, and at Coca-Cola, this is the difference it made. That makes it just a lot stronger and a lot more realistic that you actually are having that impact. But yeah, it's definitely an external party.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
Sounds like a lot of work, but it sounds like it's worth it.
it's worth it, but it's a lot of work. Yeah, definitely.
Well, I'd love to go back to some um, a little bit more questions on, behavioral product
Mm.
management. So how do you incorporate, behavioral product management into your development process? And if you could maybe share an example where this approach influenced a major product decision.
Yeah, so I'm like, I really love behavioral product management. So there's this whole kind of movement of like behavioral product management versus classical product management. There's a really good company, by the way, that I can recommend that gives like courses and training on that, called Irrational Labs. So we've done some like trainings, and they have public content as well. The guy that started it is actually as in, was a professor, or still is a professor, I think, in behavioral economics. So that kind of mixes economics with psychology, and kind of steps away from people are rational in their behavior. And I think we all know that like we're not rational in our behavior. There's a lot of ways where a user will interact with a product and not be fully rational in their choices. um but overall, so like behavioral science that just tries to understand how individuals behave, think, and kind of make choices. And why is it like, why am I so passionate about it? I'm not sure, like, as in, even if I look at Stream, for example, it's a different type of product. I'm not sure whether behavioral product management would be so useful in that toolbox. But we're doing sales enablement, and sales enablement inherently is about behavioral change. So you essentially, it's like a classical view that they always give, is like you have 10% of your reps are like top reps. They like hit the quota, or kind of exceed that quota. 10% are just shitty reps, and you probably want to, like, as in, they'll probably get rid of them at some point. And then 80% of them are okay. And then the big question is like, with enablement, how can you shift that curve? Like, how can you learn from that 10% and shift that curve? And that truly is like, how do you change the behavior of that 80% group? That's the true question. um so in that sense, like, that's why behavioral product management, and like behavioral psychology, or science, for me, is so like fundamental. But there's these cool comparisons between like classical product management and behavioral product management. So it's like, I'm trying to remember some of the like differences, but it's like, so the classical is typically like user needs and market demands is what you look at. And then if you look at behavioral product management, that would be, what is the user behavior instead of the user needs, and how do they make decisions, rather than like what does the market demand or define. There's like, well, I think every product manager is like, you have to listen to users and so on. And then behavioral product management says like, don't always listen to your users. Look at what users are actually doing, as a kind of contrast. And then you have like UX research as classical, is like you do interviews, you do surveys. Those are the typical tools, versus sort of like academic research is what in behavioral product management you would use. You would like go back to actual social sciences and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's definitely like, it's not that I'm it's not like we do only behavioral product management. There's a lot of like, it's a mix, and it's probably still 80% classic techniques, and then we lay some of that behavioral product management into the toolbox of product managers, product designers especially.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Did
I
you
think
want?
that's so
Yeah,
important because they say when you take like a personality test that you shouldn't take it. You should have
yeah,
somebody who knows you really well take it because just as humans, like we want to say, oh no, I do. Like I get out of bed as soon as the first alarm goes off. Like I never snooze. But
exactly.
your actual behavior is much different than what you wish it was.
Absolutely, absolutely spot on. So yeah. So I don't know, like I think you asked like, did it drive big decisions or like big direction? Um, I mean, I don't think they're like big things, but it has come back a few times. Like, I think the main one, for example, is like, just because you mentioned like the alarm clock example. So in our space, it's like sales managers is a big focus. Like every company wants a sales manager to be a coach and to be like coaching their sales reps. But if you look at academic research, there's something, I don't know if you call, do you know the Peter principle?
I don't think I'm familiar.
Yeah. So the Peter principle says that you essentially get promoted to the level of sort of, yeah, sort of respective incompetence, I think is the official terminology. So what that means is essentially like, you get promoted because of the skills you're good at in your current role, which doesn't mean you're good at like, as in the skills that you'll need in the next role. And so there's quite a lot of academic research whether that's true. So Peter was like the guy that coined that term. And then they did quite a lot of academic research around that in social sciences, and sales managers was like a big focus for them,
Mhm.
because generally they actually do get promoted because they're top sellers, not just because they're great coaches or managers, or like, no, it's just the top seller gets promoted and becomes a sales manager. um, so there's like a massive bias there, that if you do sort of just your classical research, you'll get that alarm clock answer. Like you'll talk to a sales manager and it's like, yeah, I do like coach on a one-on-one basis. And then the reality is like, no, they're just like looking at deal progression. They're like, I don't know, trying to overwrite what the rep is doing or take over. And that's actually based on academic research. So academic research tells you a bit more than you would probably uncover. And that definitely changed the direction of how we invested in features and like sales managers as a persona. So that was definitely like an impactful one, I would say, where because of academic research, we took a bit of a different direction.
Yeah, that makes a ton
Yeah.
of sense. And I feel like, I mean, that's across not even just like sales or product or anything. Like, not everyone is made to be a manager. They could be really great at whatever it is they're doing now. And then, when you get promoted and you move up, there's different skill sets that you need and that you have to, trickle down into the people that you're now managing. And it can be really hard, I'm sure, for people who are just starting out.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
So going back to the UX side,
Mm,
um, how do you integrate your UX research findings into your product roadmap at Showpad? And then how do you prioritize, again, going back to the different industries, how do you prioritize customer needs when the research reveals, contrasting preferences across, manufacturing versus healthcare versus tech?
mm, yeah. Yeah, like, UX research has been massively impact. Like I can't just understate it. It's been massively impactful the last few years. Um, it's a really hard role to hire for. So I've seen like, as in we've had a couple of iterations where it wasn't the right fit. We have an absolute rock star now. She's called Gemma. Like if she ever watches this recording, Gemma, you're amazing. She knows that already internally. People rave about her all the time, but it's essentially it is really only one person, and of course, like product managers will do UX research
Mm,
techniques, and she'll coach them as well on how to do like interview techniques. Um, but really, it's one person that does the longer term research. So there's a couple of things she's mapped out is like our personas. It's pretty complex. Like there, I talked about sales managers. Then in sales reps, there's different. We call them field sellers, people that really go in the field versus inside sellers that are typically just as in using Zoom and the typical tech sales. I would say. Then you have account managers as well, is again a bit of a different persona, and there's more. And then we have the enablement and marketing. So there's quite a few people. So she mapped out like all of the different personas, and that was super, super helpful.
mhm.
Um, it was something I really love is like she posts these like type of reels from her UX research. Like she does interviews with end users, with sellers typically, and we have this UX research channel on Slack, and she'll post these little reels that are like, yeah, everybody loves watching those. It's one of my favorite channels. So that's something that, as in, she did a really good job in. I think the real risk with UX research is that it's like most of the research, it lands somewhere on the backlog, and she does a really good job at promoting that, so and making it impactful across the company. Danger, I would say, with research is that like however way you take it, it's inherently slow, and sometimes you don't have the time. Like
Yeah.
it's that's the difference between like being in academia where you have time versus in product management where sometimes you have to make decisions without knowing all of that, and then you either use your gut to use data research, anything that is like de-risks that, so that makes it a bit different. So it is going to be slow, so you need to give it time. So don't do it for things that are like, as in yeah, where you need to make quick decisions.
Yeah.
The way that we, because I think you also asked about like integrate, like how do you prioritize it or how do you integrate that, right?
Yeah.
Into the
Into
product.
your product roadmap. Yeah.
Yeah. um so one big way is like I basically write a product strategy for the year where I look at we use the typical kind of kernel of strategy. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's like a diagnosis, then you write guiding policies, and then coherent actions. So in that diagnosis, one section that I use is like all of Gemma's UX research for that year. I kind of like take the bulk of that and take out the elements that are really impactful, and they define our overall strategy. And so the strategy, that's not like we're going to do this year or that. It really sets the guidelines, and then we do a yearly planning. But that's one way of how it incorporates in there. So her research loops into that, and then I set kind of the constraints. It
Mhm.
definitely goes into product vision. So we've really updated our product vision based on large elements of her research, of like unmet needs, pains in our user base, which is like focuses a bit more on account management, for example. That really drives our vision. So it's really one way that it influences. On smaller ways is like we've done onboarding guides, as in based on research where she's, as in sometimes she talks to users and they're like, well, I didn't even know you had that feature, that's awesome, or this is really hard. And so we've done like small onboarding guides and stuff like that based on that UX research. And then like on really like new products or new features, we'll focus her like on that, and then she'll have a big research project to help like the team of PMs that is working on that. And then yeah, prioritizing is strategy, right? Like that's what strategy is about. That's what I love doing. It's my, as in, to make like the large choices is where I come in.
Mhm.
But her work is like, as in UX research, is like gold, really gold to me for making those choices. So
Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah,
Well, great job to her. Give her a
yeah,
shout out again.
true. Yeah.
And so you mentioned that sometimes you don't have the time to wait, whatever it is, 6 months, a year,
Mm.
to see all this research and data and all of that. So when you're selling to these enterprise clients, how do you balance the trade-off between, building something scalable and quickly versus, the deep customizations that they need, or, the specific needs that a healthcare client has versus a tech client?
Yeah. Um, I mean, they're like, yes, they're complex. They're sometimes unique. One thing I do teach to, and something, well, teach or we've kind of brought into the product management team, is it's also maybe a bit overrated. And I think that happens in every sales team towards product management, is like, hey, we have this $1 million deal or 100,000, as in depends on your like contract size, but they'll always be like, if we do this and insert large deal, then and we have those features, then we'll definitely close that. So we look at that a bit differently, because we're a profitable company, and realistically, of that, like, take a 1 million customer, an enterprise customer, I can invest about 5% of that 1 million back into the product each year. So that's 50K. That's actually not that much. That's like, as in, if you calculate that back to how much a team costs, that's about 2 team weeks. So you can run a team for 2 weeks with just
Yeah.
that investment. So um I think there it's like, if they have unique requirements, you almost always need to, unless it's really small, you almost always need to go look across your user base to find more proof points, uh, to actually, for it to merit you making an investment. Like, making software is really expensive. Like, I don't know. I think PMs sometimes underestimate that. It's like they get given, like, as in, typically 150,000 each quarter to invest. It's quite a lot of money if you think about it. So it's expensive to run a team. So hence you always need to look at like needs across, and that's just a really good practice.
Yeah.
Um,
And I feel like the sales team doesn't always realize, like, they're in this $1 million deal and they're like, okay, just make this little feature really fast. And it's like, it's not that fast. Uh, and so it can really derail, your whole product strategy for the entire year when you have, all these random requests coming in just to close the deal. Just help me out.
yeah, but I guess it's always a bit of a beautiful chaos in a way, as in, for me it feels structured, but I guess like in reality it's still like, as in, there's still a lot of noise, as in noise is always there. There's always escalations and so on. um there are a couple of ways that we've really learned to manage those larger enterprise customers, is like, build, wow, you guys are super good at that, like, build APIs and SDKs, right? Is I think one clear way that we've helped with that, because that means that, like, a lot of the custom needs we've built, we call it the enablement operating system. So the idea is that we have core functions, but you can build on top of that with APIs. You can make these Showpad apps as well, those visual tools that I talked about. So we have a whole developer community around that as well, just like yourself. And those enterprise customers, like, yes, they're complex, they have unique needs, but they also have deep pockets in general, as in, they're typically willing to pay for stuff.
Yeah.
So that's one way that you can really manage if you have a side kind of way. So typically, we call it professional services.
Mhm.
where or partners, as in we have really companies that build on top of Showpad, for example. So that's a really good way to deal with some of those custom needs. Product sponsorship I mentioned as well. So like as in having product leaders directly really helps, I feel, in setting expectations and really challenging some of those. Like, we need that, it's a unique requirement. Often if you present your roadmap, they're actually really bought into it and they understand. They really want predictability. That's probably one of the biggest enterprise needs. Like, you can't it's a scary beast, as in, or how do you say that, like an anxious beast almost, like as in it's scared very quickly. So you can't come with like, hey, we'll do something new, or this thing that we said that was going to ship. They're actually relying, they typically have an internal roadmap
Mhm.
uh, that they need to get budget for, so they want you to be predictable. So you do need to plan a little bit more ahead, so you lose a little bit of agility in enterprise as a trade-off. So
Yeah.
you need to have a longer term roadmap essentially. And we do have commitments like here and there, but it's they always require sort of exec approval. So as in, we do still here and there do custom work, but very, very limited.
Yeah, that's awesome. And as we, kind of wrap up on our time today, I just wanted to finish off with a last question. We've talked a lot about, features and how you build them and how product management, behavioral product management, using
Mm-mm,
UX, all those things. But once the feature is out and you've launched it, how do you guys measure the success of these features?
mm, yeah. Um, so there's like the part where customers measure the success in general. So the return on investment of investing in Showpad from their perspective is like a big question. So we have high level metrics of what that needs to drive. They're typically like the typical sales and marketing metrics of like marketing efficiency, the ROI of content, making that content, how much revenue did it influence, how much pipeline did it drive, those types of things. Sales velocity, average deal size, cycle length, like all of those things are things that we measure overall and that are really the outcome metrics for our customers. I think the big challenge there, and that's where it gets difficult at the feature level, is like, we understand I'm going to be super transparent here. We understand the correlation there between all of that. So there's clearly a link between our platform, all the features. Can you prove causation on all of them? Like, is it that is a lot harder, and it gets a lot harder the deeper on the feature level you get. So we have UX research, again, kind of like gets extra proof points of like, this makes it extra sticky, so we know which features, for example, make the product extra sticky, etc. um Outside of that, as in, it's the typical adoption really is still the biggest driver overall. I think
Mhm.
for all B2B software, by the way, there's always two big problems. It's adoption and integration, like how well integrated are you to the rest of the tools. But like, adoption is probably our biggest one. So MAU percentage, so how many of our licenses that we've sold are actually active users, is one of the biggest core metrics, next to like net promoter score for sales reps as well. Yeah. So, but it's still a challenge overall, and definitely at the feature level is hard to loop it back to those outcome metrics.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, adoption is probably by far the biggest one because I know I use all these different platforms and there's certain things that I use and don't use and, but the person who sits next to me might use different features than I do.
Yeah,
That makes a ton of sense.
yeah, yeah. I think we have one big advantage, is that we, as in, since we're a sales enablement tool, we typically have a sales enablement team at the customer.
Hmm.
and their job is really to explain every, as in like it is really to enable the sales team. So they'll do trainings and they'll do so if that enablement team does a really good job, they obviously are helped by our customer success team and so on.
Yep.
But it's kind of their like their bread and butter, and they're really bought into it as well, so that definitely helps us.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a great conversation. Where can people find you if they have additional questions or would just like to, follow along with you and Showpad?
Awesome. So I think LinkedIn is probably still like the best one. Other socials is like I'm happy to share like WhatsApp as well. I've done that at conferences as well. So but unless as in maybe get spammed too much with like recruiter calls and stuff like that, we all get that. So but definitely LinkedIn is the first one, email as well, and then happy to share phone numbers as well for people who really want to go one-on-one.
Yeah, awesome. Well, make sure to give them a follow on LinkedIn and, see if you can form a relationship and then maybe get the WhatsApp, no spams.
Correct, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who has joined and for those who have tuned in later on our YouTube. Um, but thank you again, Bram, and I'll see you backstage.
All right, awesome, thanks, bye bye.